Okay, I've never made any kind of video like this before, so we'll see how this goes, but I just thought I'd record how I make the chicharrones for pupusas. I just buy like a boneless pork butt roast or shoulder roast and make sure it has a lot of fat on it because you need the fat. Or we also get, we buy part of a pig every year, and any of the roasts from that are really fatty, so, and they're not labeled what type of, like what part of the pig they are, what type of roast they are, but I'll use any one of those and maybe like a pork belly along with it. I don't have any of that left this year though, so I am just gonna use this one. Also, this one, I don't know if I mentioned, I got this at Aldi's. It's about 4.5 pounds. Okay, here's my roast out of the bag. It has like a little net around it. I just cut that off and then cut it into pieces that are maybe like an inch big or so. They don't have to be a super specific size because we're gonna cook it down and then food process and everything anyway, so just into smaller. Okay, the next step here, I have the meat cut up. I'll take like some of the fattier pieces and put it in first because I kind of want the fat at the bottom. You can use, I'll use a pot like this if I have a lot, which I have a lot right now. Otherwise, if you have a deep frying pan, you can use that too. Okay, all the meat is in there. I'll just stir it every once in a while. I have a big wooden spoon I use to just kind of stir it. I've seen some people that will they'll boil the meat first in water and then put it in oil and fry it. I don't do that. I just use this meat and cook it in its own fat. But that's another option too if you wanted to do it that way. But if you use a less fattier meat, it really does affect the taste. So I always do it this way. I also throw in some salt, maybe just a teaspoon or two, probably 2 while I'm cooking it, but that's all the seasoning that I do for right now. Okay, so I've mixed up the salt and everything, and now I'm just going to cover it and cook it for, it's on high right now. I'll wait till it's going a little better and then I'll probably lower it, but we're going to cook it for probably at least a couple hours. So we'll just leave it for now and come back and check on it in maybe 10 minutes and see how so it's been now about 15 minutes, and as you can see there's a lot of liquid in there now, and that's all just from the fat. I didn't add any liquid in or anything. And now that the meat's mostly cooked at this point, I'm going to turn the heat down a little bit and just keep cooking it. I mean, the meat's cooked, but we want it cooked. It's going to be hard almost, so we'll keep. So the meat's been cooking a little over an hour, I would say. Part of me always wonders if we just stopped here and continued with the process, if it would be fine, instead of cooking it so much. Supposedly that affects the texture. Someday I'll try it and let you know. But for now, keep cooking it. Still pretty soft. It's getting a little firmer, but still soft, so we're gonna keep. So the meat is not quite toasted. It's probably been an hour and a half or so, but I just switched from non-stick pans to regular pans, and it's really sticking to the bottom, so I think even though it's not as toasty as I usually get it, I'm just gonna stop here. I mean, I think this is fine. It's been cooked a lot. It's getting pretty firm and toasty in a couple spots, but it's super stuck to the bottom, so I don't want to cook it too much more. So we're gonna stop here. I'm gonna drain off the fat and let it cool, and then I'll put it in the fridge for All right, so I drained off the fat. As you can see, there's a lot of fat. And like it's a little, it starts to get almost like bacon, like tougher and just a little toasty. Like on the bottom, it got really stuck on there. So I'm probably going to try to like scrape some of that off because I feel like that more toasted part adds a certain flavor that people like for the chicharrones, so I'm going to try to scrape some of that off to include it. But I'm just going to let it cool. I'll put it in the fridge and then we'll do the rest. So I scraped the bottom of the pan really good, just with a metal spatula, but I got all this meat off the bottom of the pan that's nice and crispy, so I am going to include that in there. I think it's just going to add more of the texture and flavor that we want. So, but it did get pretty nice and toasty and like firm that it needs to be for the most part. So we're going to put it in the fridge for tonight and keep going. We're back on day 2. The meat has been in the fridge overnight, so I took it out and put it back in a deep frying pan. It's not taking up as much space now. And we're going to cook it with, this is about well, not quite 2.5 pounds. Just a little over 2 pounds, I suppose, of prepared meat. And we're going to use 4 Roma tomatoes, 4 garlic cloves, an onion, and a green pepper. I'm not going to dice them because you're going to put it in the food processor, but I'll just cut them into chunks kind of and toss them in there. Alright, so I switched pans because the other pan ended up being way too small once I got all the veggies in. So now we have 4 tomatoes, 4 garlic cloves, 1 onion, 1 green pepper, and I'm just going to start cooking it over high fire to start, and we'll just cook it till all the liquids kind of come out of the veggies and it'll start to re-soften the meat. So the meat's starting to soften a little bit again, and the veggies are letting go of some of their juice too. I'll just kind of come by every once in a while, stir it around, and kind of push some of the crunchier veggies down to the bottom. And we just keep letting it cook. Alright, I think the meat is almost ready. I was just going to say too, if you buy the pork, if you're in the city, there might be like a carniceria somewhere and you can buy the pork already cooked. I think in most, at least around in Minnesota, most of the carnicerias are Mexican. So they don't call them chicharrones, they call it like, I think it's like clales or chales or something like that, and it's just the super cooked down pork. They don't all have it, but some do. So if you were to buy it like that already, then you would just start with this step where you're softening it with the vegetables. But I think we are pretty much done. The meat's soft, the veggies are soft. So I'm gonna let it cool again. And put it back in the fridge, and then tomorrow we'll just process it in the food processor. Okay, so now it's time to food process the meat. Oh, you know what? All right, now it's time to food process the meat. Since it was in the fridge overnight, I did just kind of let it warm up a little bit so it's not so hard. And I'm just going to put it in little batches into the food processor. I food processed the first batch here, and now and the veggies were in there and everything, the cooked veggies in there with it, and now it's the consistency almost like tuna, almost like a paste. We want it to be the same consistency that our masa is going to be, so you just want it to be kind of like moist and kind of like a paste. So I'm going to finish doing the rest here in small batches like this. I've food processed all the meat now, and it's really almost like a mush, like the consistency of like canned cat or dog food. I know that sounds gross, but that is perfect. That's exactly the consistency that we want. Like I said, the more similar to the texture of the masa it is, the easier it's going to be to make the pupusas when you're patting them out. If the meat is too thick, like if it's almost like shredded meat, it's going to be super hard. They're going to break. It just doesn't mash in there well. Also, if it's too wet, the same thing happens. The masa just breaks apart and they're super hard to hold together. So if, you know, I'm always tempted to throw in an extra tomato. I just feel like it's a lot of meat. I need another tomato. And I have done that before and it's come out super wet, the meat, and it is so hard to work with. If that does happen to you, you can just kind of put the meat in the freezer and firm it up a little bit before you use it, and that can kind of help. Or maybe kind of heat it a little bit and try to like get some of the moisture out of it. But if you can just get it to this consistency, it's perfect. So now I would just measure it out into like 1 pound per bag and freeze them. So then when I decide that I want to make pupusas, it's just real easy to take a bag out. And then all this, I mean, this is the hardest part of making pupusas, the most time consuming. This part's all done, so it makes it a lot easier if you just want to take a bag out and make them one night for